So now we open the next 10 minutes for question and answer. I haven't seen anyone raising hand. Can I just ask the first question for you, Bernardo?
Yeah.
Like, how do you see your own experience as someone who's migrating to Australia? You know, how much your experience will color or will influence your research?
Well, I think that as an insider and of course I will have to go across like reflection and think about my position as a researcher. But to answer your question, I think that there are a lot of positive aspects. First of all, the access to the Argentine community, the use of the language, and the deep understanding of the history. And as a cross-border study, I think that that's pretty important because I'm not interested in just a fixed photo of Argentines here in Perth, but I'm really interested in their story, and that includes a past and present, where I think that my understanding and be myself, an Argentino, I think it's quite important, especially because I will conduct ethnographic research, and there are a lot of positive aspects about using the language and running participant observation in some cultural events.
Thanks.
I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, that answers. Thank you a lot. Thanks. Now we have Greg, Sam, Yutao, and Martin. Greg?
Thanks for that.
I cannot hear very well.
Your voice is breaking.
Okay, I got put back on mute. You mentioned the term Latinos as one of the terms that was kind of guiding previous research and such. I'm wondering how much that wider identity has gotten any purchase here in Australia, and whether it affects things like, in terms of your own foci, the social networks, the range of caregiving and such. Given the relatively small numbers of Argentine migrants, according to that map you showed in Perth, to what extent is there a larger identity with solidarity with other South Americans, with Latinos, or whatever, that would bring you beyond the question of just looking at Argentinian origin migrants in what you're covering?
Well, I think it's a really good question, Greg. I think that it has to do with I was presenting when I was going through the background and the gap in the literature. That I think that there's a lot of lack of knowledge about different countries of Latin America. And to start, I think that the tendency is to put them all together as part of a same group, not considering their differences. A similar thing happens with African countries and Asian countries. I think that actually the lack of knowledge, and that is actually an opportunity for my research project, because it's actually what will bring together more specific understanding of a community, if there is any. But there is a lot of study, especially in the United States, about the Latino identity. But I could not probably provide further details about those research in the United States. But here in Australia, from my literature review, I can find that there is very little information about Latin American studies. There is starting to be more focus on Chilean communities, Brazilian communities, and Colombian communities as the main groups in terms of numbers. But something that brought me to conduct this research as well is the lack of qualitative analysis of all these communities. There is a lot of quantitative data that is coming from the census. And something else that is important to highlight is that when you go to the Australian census, a lot of the temporary information about migrants is still under the category of other Americans. So it's actually institutionalized. You cannot find information about Argentines in the Australian census, just information about residents, permanent residents. But if not, everything else is under the category of other Americans. I don't know if that was very clear, but Yeah, I think that the lack of, I would say that is the lack of knowledge about the specific countries of Latin America, what brings to this idea of the Latino.
Cool. Okay, next, Sam.
Yeah, Bernardo, thanks. That was excellent. I wanted to ask whether you had any more thoughts about the idea of security, which you presented under the idea of home building within your larger matrix. I just wanted to hear more about ideas around security and what you mean.
So when you go through the bibliography about this idea of home building, some authors refer to sense of security, some others use the idea of control, and it has to do with risk, and it has to do with the risk of a migrant that a migrant takes when they migrate to another country. And I think it's very important, and as a dimension of my research project, I think that I will be able to capture a lot of data that has to do with that movement between back and forward in between, the risk that migrants are taking when they migrate to another place, and how that is interfere with their understanding of home.
Next would be Yutao.
Okay, thank you, Bernardo. It's quite a great presentation for the milestone requirement for the university. I think it's quite clear, it's well structured, and it clearly indicates that you understand what you're doing and you understand what kind of contribution you're going to make. That's great. So I have a question, but I also have a few comments. Feel free to take it or ignore it. So firstly, I mean, I think you did a very good job in highlighting the possible empirical contribution you're going to make into the literature, which is great. But as a PhD student, I think you probably are also thinking about the theoretical contributions there. It could be that it's very early now, but I'm not so sure that I'm quite, I quite understand that from your presentation. If you can elaborate a little bit about the theoretical hook here that you're going to try to address, that would be great. And on that, I was thinking, it's a personal sort of suggestion, not necessarily from the literature, that you mentioned Argentina used to be a major destination of migrants, similar to Australia. So would that have impact on Argentina people's understanding on the very concept of home? You know, I was trying to think about Chinese migrants. Many of them, if they directly from mainland China, they probably understand very well where their ancestors are from. And that's, of course, is also constructed in a way. But then people who migrate, who are Chinese ethnicity, but they migrate from Southeast Asian, you know, they often face more conflicted or competing sense of home or the Chineseness there. So that's might be something you want to consider there. My comments really is about how to defend your strategy of choosing Perth as your main set of data collection. I do understand it's out of practicality, and that's a very legitimate reason, I think. But when it comes to, say, when you finish the research and when you come to the final viva, I think that will likely to be one of the questions that examiners want to ask you, simply because for examiners it's such an easy question to ask, difficult to answer. You might want to think about, apart from the practical reasons, what else? I mean, this is normally a question of the trick that examiners try to show that they're smarter than you, but they are not, right? So either Perth is selected because it represents well about, you know, the Latin American migrants or whatever, or Perth is quite special, that it gives you a unique chance to address some of the things that other data cannot allow you to address or to engage with a certain theory. You might want to think about that. You know, you need to define yourself eventually. You need to go beyond just saying it's practically sound for me to do that, okay? That's the comments. So link the comments with my question. I actually think you probably want to think about your defense strategy with your theoretical contribution there. And for me, that Argentina's special character, that it used to be a destination of migrants, but now it's a sending country, that probably is quite unique in many ways. But
yeah,
that's just my personal feeling. So
yeah, happy to answer your three questions. Well, I kind of found three questions in your comments. So the first one has to do with a theoretical contribution. I think that with my research project, there are two main fields. One that has to do with Argentines coming to Australia and providing, like, collecting data related to a possible community formation process, and again filling that gap that has to do with Argentines in Australia. But on top of that, I think that a very important contribution has to do, as you said, with the theoretical notions of home building practices, social care and support networks, and very important temporary migration. And that's where I want to go. I think that the idea of working on those notions is to be part of the discussion around temporary migration here in Australia and how that is intersecting with these everyday practices. And there is where the Argentines in Australia becomes a case study, okay, that I want to use to understand this process. And going to your second question about, I don't know if that one was very answered, but your second question about Argentines understanding migration processes, probably with the first generation of Argentines that came here to during 1970s and 1980s, yes, because they are second generation of migrants. So the immigrants that went to Australia to Argentina was mainly during the First and Second World War. As a migrant that I'm coming to Australia, probably my understanding in using your terms of migration probably now I grew up in Argentina as an Argentine, and I grew up when my grandfather was Italian, but no, I wouldn't say that that's probably something important. But for those that I will be interviewing that are those first wave, yes. And your comment is very very useful, because it will definitely be something important in their lives, and I will find out when I run my interviews. And in regards to Perth as the site, I think that it has to do with my ethnographic research method, the importance of running this here in Perth. I mean, I could go to live to Sydney and move to Sydney or move to Melbourne, but I would have to spend 8-9 months getting to know a community, trying to establish a network, getting to know everyone, renting a place. It's quite hard. I mean, it would be the second time that I'm running ethnographic research, and considering my first experience, you need some time to do it. You need to build a trust in the community, and that trust means time. And I have now my experience here in Perth as some capital that I can use